top and the non-attainment on the bottom. And this is what the country looks like, where the non-attainment zones are, where you might see some what we call in-use regulations and pull for this new technology. And the government was looking at, the federal government was looking at lowering that ozone level. And if they did, then you can see a lot more areas would be in non-attainment. Last year, the decision was made to delay that rezoning. So we are back to that first chart I showed there. That's where we are seeing this kind of pull for the new Tier 4 technology because those counties are in so-called non-attainment. That's about all for the non-attainment zones. Just to give you some background on where you would see some pull for the newer equipment. But speaking now about the Tier 4, you can see how the box on the vertical, it's a particulate matter, on the horizontal NOx. Those are the two things we look at. And then Tier 3, where we were, starting in 2006, and then going down into 11 and 014, we have two more step changes. But you compare it back about 20 or 30 years, it's a huge reduction, almost 1% or less of where we were 15, 20 years ago. So there's been a lot of changes on the engines, and now we're moving into this Tier 4 time frame. The Tier 4 time frame did start back in 2011. Almost 2 years ago, we introduced our first machine in August of 2010. And the regulations are split up based on horsepower, a little bit different than the on-highway, where it's all trucks are affected at the same time. So the machines over 175 horsepower, and this is whether it be construction or ag or turf or forestry, light towers or access towers, whatever it might be, all off-highway equipment is affected the same way with these regulations I have on the screen now. So you can see that in this year, 2012, it was the utility side between 75 and 175, and then next year, a lot of our compact equipment and probably a broad selection of the types of equipment sold into the lift and access market will be impacted as well. Same technology in those 3 years, but it's just different horsepower ranges. Then 2014, 2015, we start doing it again on that same equipment. It's the same horsepower brakes, but that'll be final Tier 4. And John Deere, we've announced that we'll be using SCR. And I'll explain that a little bit later. So at John Deere, the technology approach we've been using is over the tier levels, we've added another set of technology, starting back with Tier 2, around the 2000 time frame. We had a high-pressure common rail. Tier 3, we added cooled EGR and variable geometry turbos. And this technology is very similar to what a lot of the other manufacturers are using as well. So although it says John Deere on this slide, a lot of the manufacturers are using very similar technology now. With interim Tier 4, the big add was this DOC DPF. Somebody did ask here, what as opposed to what on the EGR. Cooled EGR is usually a piece of hardware, EGR cooler and a valve on the outside of the engine. Some people have tried to do it in cylinder by valve timing. So that would be one way that you can do this different than using a EGR cooler and valve, is you can manipulate the valve timing. And in fact, that's what we did on what we call a PowerTech E. Is it was all done for the with the valve timing. On the PowerTech Plus, that's where we've added an EGR cooler. So you can do external EGR, and there's other ways of doing internal EGR. And the different manufacturers have chosen both ways. And then with the interim Tier 4, that's a good question. Any other questions, keep on sending them to Katie. I'll be checking the screen here. With interim Tier 4, you could no longer do it just on the engine itself, and that's where we added this DOC DPF. And it's a pretty large device, as well as on final Tier 4 where we have this SCR. These are very big devices, and how do you get them on the machine and still keep visibility and safety? That's what I'll explain a little bit. My pictures, again, will be yellow machines because I'm working in the construction and forestry division here at John Deere. But as you know, about half of the engines we make at John Deere go into other OEMs. So, and a lot of them end up in the lift and access industry, as well as a compressor, pump, generator. This technology is the same, but I will be showing a lot of yellow pictures just to give you some frame of reference on how it impacts the equipment. All right, this is what a DPF looks like, and this is about 3 feet long and 12 to 18 inches in diameter. And how do you get that on a piece of equipment and still have the same power, performance, functionality, safety, and visibility? That was really the challenge for our engineers. But the key thing is, and I was just at the demo yesterday where they had some Tier 3 machines, and you accelerate them, you see a puff of black smoke. With an interim Tier 4, you just don't see that anymore, because it all gets captured by this particulate filter. And the particulate filter then cleans up the particulate matter, and you don't see that puff of black smoke anymore out of the machine. So the EPA says that the minimum service interval, and this DPF is serviceable, minimum interval is 4,500 hours, or below 175 horsepower, it's 3,000 hours. So you have to take that DPF out and clean it, and get rid of the ash that accumulates. Ash accumulates on a DPF because every diesel engine burns oil. And when you burn oil, it accumulates as ash, and you have to take that out to get it clean. So there are ways to clean it. You basically reverse the flow and blow the ash out of it and move forward. As it says up above, the DOC is good for the life of the machine. You never have to take that component out. It's really just this DPF component that gets replaced. So when we explain to our dealers and customers, we talk about the Vital 4. There's 4 key points, and I made a bunch of these presentations. It always comes down to the same 4 questions about reliability, what's the effect on fuel economy and performance, and then this regen interval. Every so often, the DPF has to clean itself of particulate filter, particulate matter, and we have it on the fly. The key thing was to have it be transparent and no impact on the operator or the operation. Question here, Mike sent over to me, can anyone clean a DPF, or can anyone do it? The answer is yes, anybody can do it, but we recommend that it gets sent back to our reman facility, and a lot of other manufacturers doing it the same way. You take that DPF out, you call the dealer brings a fresh one, clean one, and then the older one goes back to our reman facility, happens to be in Springfield, Missouri, and they have a system to clean it out. It's high pressure air that gets sent through it for a certain interval, and you want to test it to make sure it's been cleaned out. So yes, anybody can do it, but how to guarantee they've done a good job at it is really the question, and that's why we recommend not even our dealers do it. It all goes back to this reman facility where they have the equipment. And I think in the on-highway market, a lot of manufacturers have done it the same way. I recommend to send it back. I know there are some on-highway dealers that have the machine at the store, so there are ways to do it there as well at your local dealer. But at John Deere, we are recommending to exchange process, and we have a core charge on the older filter so that we can have that supply of core and keep that process going and have those parts on the shelf. A good question. Last point here is filter maintenance, and I'll explain about that as well. So those are the 4 key things that get asked about: the reliability of the engines, and the performance and fuel economy, how often this regen occurs, and then how often you have to change these filters. And the good news on all 4 of them is that we haven't seen any additional cost impact or owning and operating cost due to the interim Tier 4, and that's really what customers are often asking. So moving on to the first one of the Vital 4, we did let's see, there's another question here now from Katie. Is there a certification required for this cleaning? Technically, no, there isn't. And in California, they've been using a retrofit or putting on these filters on machines and equipment for a long time due to the California rule. And in the process of that, the demands from the California rule is not as strenuous. It only required to stay on there for 1,000 hours. And they found that people have these kinds of pieces of equipment set up in vans, and the mobile vans go around cleaning out these filters. Now, how do you guarantee the quality and make sure they're doing a good job? It's a big unknown, but there is no certification for that. We do recommend, just for guaranteeing that it's cleaned out, it all be done in a controlled environment. Good questions there. Keep them flowing. So the first one was the unprecedented testing, and our focus really was on what we call corner conditions. And here you can see a lot of those corner conditions, but the 3 biggest that we had were cold weather, hot weather, and altitude as well. Good, another question coming in. Approximate cost to have the cleaning performed outside the warranty period. So whether, yeah, outside the warranty period, the cost in the marketplace really has been established by the on-highway. And when you go to an on-highway deal, it's in the $400 to $800 range. So the bigger the filter, the more expensive. But it's usually in that range of $400 to $800. And there is a stiff core charge, as I mentioned, several $1,000s. But to do an exchange, it's about $400 to $800, and that's where you'll find our pricing as well. If you went into a John Deere dealer, it would be in that range, $400 to $800. Let's see. Looks like similar question here. Certification required for the cleaning. Right. Same thing. Repeat question. Okay. So when you look at the testing, it's really about hot, cold, and altitude. Although there are a lot of other things there. When you go up to the Arctic, people are interested in overnight idle, Arctic cold conditions. So we took it up in the mountains in the United States. The Colorado Rockies is the best place. And then for the hot weather, our test facility is down in Texas. And then we have the cold weather we did up in Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, which is pretty cold. And I was surprised to see that some engineers are volunteering to go there. But did an unbelievable amount of testing, close to 1 million hours. And good news is, on the reliability front, our interim Tier 4 reliability is already twice as good compared to the Tier 3 engines. So all of this testing really paid off ahead of time and resulted here. You can see reliability out the gate on an interim Tier 4 is in green versus a yellow. The yellow is the Tier 3. So that's a mature Tier 3. It's been in production. We've exceeded by a factor of 2 already. So the good news in the field, we've had really excellent introduction of the product in the marketplace. And when you talk about fuel efficiency in our market, whether it be a light tower or a lift or construction equipment, there really is no industry standard for testing on fuel economy. But in the ag business, of which John Deere is a big player, there is a standardized test that everybody takes part in. It's called Nebraska test. And we give our machine there as well as our competitors. They run it down the field, the same conditions, and we've always been leader in that category. And in fact, when you compare interim Tier 4 to Tier 3, there's been no degradation in the fuel consumption. So good news there from Nebraska test result. That's all public info that you can see, and we compare it to our competitors as well there. Again, beating the competitors and also as good as the Tier 3. Next one is the regen interval. Regen means that the filter cleans itself of particulate matter, so it's converting chemically the black stuff that gets caught on the filter and then converting it to water and the carbon dioxide. And our goal was to have that be done every 8 hours. What we're seeing on these kinds of machines, and you would see on access equipment as well with the John Deere engine, is that the interval is about 2 to 3 times longer than we expected. So that's good news. The fewer regens, the better the fuel consumption, and it's good news all around as far as owning and operating costs. So about every 20 to 25 hours, you will see or know that the filter is cleaning itself because the light comes on the dashboard and says that the filter is cleaning itself. This ash cleaning, I told you that the government requires 4,500 hours minimum, but based on duty cycle, which is exhaust flow, you will see that the interval will vary, and what we're seeing out in the field is 10 to 15,000 hours. So we're going about 2 to 3 times longer than the government minimum. You will find other manufacturers are requiring it at 4,500 and fixing it. And what we do is we monitor how much fuel is burned, and that will tell you how much oil is burned, and that is proportional to how much ash is accumulating on the filter. So we're getting about 2 to 3 times length on the interval. And again, that's all good news for customers as far as owning and operating costs, because you don't have to take this filter out and clean it. We call that condition-based monitoring because it's monitoring the activity of the engine on the equipment and keeping track of the status of the components. We do that on a lot of things on our machine, and I'll explain a little bit about that later. This is what it looks like inside a dozer. 850 dozer, but on a generator or a pump or access equipment would be very similar. You can see turbocharger in the middle. There's a fuel injector on the exhaust. There's a dual-walled insulated pipe coming around. You see a flexible bellows, and the black device at the top is the particulate filter. Somebody asked here about the API standard of oil. It's a CJ4 for interim Tier 4. That's a low ash oil, and I do have a slide coming up that shows that it's CJ4, and then I think somebody wrote into Katie here, it said CG. No, it's CJ4. Previous version was CI4. And you'll find that most of the on-highway trucks already converted over to the CJ4, and now all of the off-highway equipment for interim Tier 4 is also a CJ4. Why do we have a fuel injector in the exhaust? On our big equipment, its main point is to keep this DPF warm. If it's in a cold environment, you need certain ways to keep the DPF warm so that it can automatically clean itself. And one way we have is that you inject fuel, and the fuel comes around, and when it hits this DOC that I showed you in the previous slide, it creates heat by a chemical reaction. Some manufacturers are using a burner, but it's all about keeping this DPF warm, and if the DPF is warm, then it will automatically clean itself at that regen interval. One of the things that in the on-highway they didn't do so well was keeping that DPF warm, and a lot of people that had trucks experienced downtime. You had to stop the machine to let it regenerate or clean itself. And the main place they saw that was like on the refuse trucks or on delivery trucks, that they weren't getting warm enough due to the stop-and-go cycle, and they had to stop them to regenerate. So that was downtime. We don't want any downtime. So we have these pieces of technology here, like the fuel injector, the dual-walled insulated pipe, and the DOC, all with the hope of creating enough heat so the filter can clean itself. So this is a picture of a TS3, just to give you a comparison of a TS3 machine. It's our 850J, and it's going to shadow in the interim Tier 4. This was a model change to an 850K, but you can see how the size of the machine changed in order to get that technology under the hood. Now, in all of our yellow equipment, it's under the hood except on the dump trucks. Somebody asked here, is a bio oil a problem? I think they're asking about biodiesel. All of the machines have been tested. I showed you down in Texas at our Laredo test track. They're all been tested with B20. That means that the fuel has 20% biofuel in it. And we have approved all of our engines, whether it be Tier 0 all the way through Tier 4, to work with 20% biodiesel. Now, when you look in the marketplace, most people run B10 up to 10%. And it's very rare cases when you have people running with a higher concentration of biodiesel, above 20%. In those cases, no, you shouldn't run anything more than 20% biodiesel on a machine that has a DPF. And from what I've seen, most manufacturers are in that kind of category of approving B20, but nothing beyond that. So here you can see the change on the machine, but it will be very similar size changes on any kind of equipment. This is a loader. Now just watch around the back end of it where the engine compartment is, and you'll see how it gets a little bit bigger. Exhaust pipe looks a little bit different. Some of the venting on the side for airflow. Those are the kinds of changes you make to a machine to get the equipment under the hood. Now, why do we put everything under the hood? These devices are expensive, and you want to be able to control that environment so that you get a certain amount of heat in there. And also safety issue. In some markets, people have stole catalytic converters off of cars. You don't want people going in there and stealing these components for their precious metals. Somebody did ask a little bit earlier about the cost to replace. If you just get a new one and don't have the replacement, these could be several $1,000s for the DPF because there are precious metals on there that drive up the cost of them. But with the core charge, and if you do an exchange, it keeps it in that $400 to $800 range I mentioned. So by having everything under the hood, it's a way of controlling visibility and safety because these things do get warm, and then also theft deterrence because you can lock up the cabinet. These are all locked panels on the side. Another example is a big excavator here. That's the 240 size that we build in North Carolina. And then I'll show you the next one here where it goes in the next generation. And you can see around the area where the engine and the particulate filter is, it's a little bit larger, and the back end of the machine gets a little bit taller, and that's why in a lot of cases you see a rear view mirror and also a video camera off the back of the machine. How do you monitor this filter, whatever kind of machine it's on? Here you can see when the filter is cleaning itself, the white light comes on the monitor saying that it's cleaning itself. It doesn't mean the operator has to do anything, just an indication that the filter is cleaning itself. We had long discussions and involvement with our dealers and customers on this, and what color should that light be, but we felt that white would mean that you don't have to do anything. There's a question here. Will older machines be able to operate if they do not have the Tier 4 engine modifications? That's a good question. That gets back to that set of slides I showed back in the beginning about the in-use rules. There are some in-use rules, and I mentioned one in New York City on construction equipment, where you have to bring in equipment that has a DPF, so it needs to have this technology. Now, I don't know that there's been a regulation yet on light towers or access towers, access equipment in New York City, but there could be if those non-attainment zones spread. That's the answer to that question. For instance, in California, the in-use rule they had there was just on construction equipment, and it didn't affect forestry or ag equipment. So each location is different, but you could see regulations on lift and access equipment in the future, depending on how those in-use rules are set and how those non-attainment zones spread. So on the monitor itself, some of the things our customers asked for was a quick way to see the status of the filter. And here you can see that it's showing green, it's half full, and it can go further, and now it's completely full. And at that point, it should do that regen and automatic cleaning. If it doesn't and there's some issue, it will go into what we call a yellow zone and ask you to park the machine. Or if there are severe problems, there's a lot of diagnostics on board, and it's saying call the dealer. We're doing quite well, as I mentioned. We don't see a lot of this yellow or red zone, but we had to put the diagnostics in place to take action if something happened. On a lot of our machines, what we've done, let's see, where can we find the information for our local areas restrictions for emissions? That's a good question. I do have a few slides coming up about some of the websites that we have, and some places that you can go to get information. And if that doesn't help as a starting point, there are a lot of links there as well. Somebody asked about what do you do with machines that can no longer be used in those zones. That's a good question. In some cases, that California rule, if you were a small manufacturer, a small contractor, a lot of people said, that's it, I'm not going to be in the business anymore. A lot of bigger companies, they tend to put their newer equipment into the sensitive markets, and you have that flexibility to move equipment around and manage the fleet. So that's what you'll be seeing from a lot of the larger contractors is a fleet planning where they would sense the rules in certain states or regions and move the newer equipments in to meet certain regulations. That's a good question. I think I'm hitting all the questions here. Yep. So this is a quick cheat sheet that we put into every cab, and we have it in several languages. If you have a Spanish or a French operator, you can get a French or Spanish card. But it says if the light comes on, what do you do? And in many cases, you don't have to do anything. But that was one of the things we learned from the on-highway, is that there was no indication of what to do. Here's another question from Mike. Can existing Tier 4 interim machines be upgraded into Tier 4 final machines? That's one of the things that we're studying. Probably unlikely that a Tier 4 interim will be upgradable into a Tier 4 final. And I'll show you a little bit later why, because there are a lot of pieces that get added. But what we do offer now are ways to upgrade Tier 2 and 3 into a Tier 4 interim. That's a good question. Here's a brochure that you can get from our dealers, or you can get online. It talks about some of these key points about the fluids, the fuel, the oil, what's needed. And somebody asked earlier about the CJ4. Here's the CJ4 API, and at John Deere we call that the plus 52 oil. Every manufacturer has a different name, but the key thing to look for is that API CJ4. And then most of the U.S. market and Canada market has gone to ultra-low sulfur diesel. up in the great north of Canada, you may see some higher sulfur, and in some areas you may see low volume fuel suppliers still shipping low sulfur diesel. But for the most part, you'll find ultra low sulfur diesel everywhere in the on and off highway, and the off highway is still dyed differently for the taxation reason. Another question here about easy way to tell if it's Tier 4. There is no easy way, but I'll just give you one. I'll go back a few slides here. One way you can tell on some of our machines, like this loader, is if you look around the exhaust area. A lot of our interim Tier 4 exhausts are a little bit larger diameter, and they also have a dilution or an air jet around where it exits the machine to dilute the air and lower the exhaust temperature. So if you look around the exhaust pipe where it exits, you'll see that some manufacturers have labeled their machine with different models or different. They put an IT4 logo on it. It's a little bit different depending on which machine and manufacturer it is. But the best way on John Deere is to see that the exhaust pipe. I showed you the dozer back here. One easy way is if it's a K dozer, you'll know it's an interim Tier 4 because we had a model change. And the same way on the excavator, we did shift to a G series on our interim Tier 4. But you can always look around that exhaust pipe. Let me jump back to where I was. Good questions. Here's a backhoe. These started production this year. Again, on the backhoe, if it's a K series in the U.S., then it's an interim Tier 4. And you can see on the smaller equipment now, you get down in the horsepower range, it gets a little bit more difficult to get everything packaged under the hood. And then next year, you'll see the skid steers as well. Compact equipment will have that technology packaged under the hood. For final Tier 4 that's coming up in 014, 015, this is the way that the technology will be. I already explained about everything on DPF. You'll see a lot of sensors on here. Then you'll see a second device called an SCR, and the second fluid called the DEF, a diesel exhaust fluid. So we have a second fluid on board, and this will hold for all of the off-highway engines at John Deere. Some of them may not have a SCR, but for the most part, above 75 horsepower, this is the kind of technology you'll see. You can see there's lots of sensors on there when it comes to final Tier 4, which lends well to something coming up about telematics in a few minutes. Just an example of a prototype machine, what it would look like. You can see here two canisters underneath the hood, and one is a DPF, and the other one is an SCR. So we have a lot of sensors, you have a lot of technology. How do you monitor all of that remotely? On Tier 4 machines at John Deere, we've decided to put this telematics on our equipment. And we call it worksite solutions. There's a lot of pieces to it. But the one I really want to focus on is something called JD-Link. JD-Link transmits data from the machine, and you can view it via the internet on your computer. And this is available on OEM applications where there's a John Deere engine as well. On just about every piece that we have, whether it be green or yellow, we have this JD-Link now. There are other things in our worksite like grade control, payload weighing, and others like Service Advisor I'll show you in a few minutes. But and here's the Service Advisor. This is kind of one of the benefits, or one of the exclusives we have at John Deere, is you can remotely interact with the machine. So if you're having some issues on a machine, you can call the dealer or the factory, and we can log on and see that remotely, and then do some diagnostics remotely as well. So there's a lot of benefits that come, and with the Tier 4, it's not just about the emissions reduction. You get a lot of new technology, and this is one of the biggest ones. So we've been training our dealers, and in my old position, this was one of the big jobs, go around and get all the dealers and customers aware. And then these are just a few examples of our dealers around the country where they've made the investment in teaching about Tier 4 and becoming experts in Tier 4 and telematics. Here's a website you can go to, deere.com/emissions. Somebody asked earlier about how to get some resources. If you go out there, it'll look a little bit different, but there should be a tab on there for resources. There used to be a bunch of videos that I made, and we put them on YouTube now. But you can go out there, and that would be the place I would start. It says emission regulations and the resources, and then we do have some maps. And I think there's another one you can call up that has a map, and you can press on each state, and it'll tell you the kinds of regulations in each state or in that region, whether it be a county or a city. We also have this website where you can ask questions, and this is telling you about things going on in the market. If we have a new product coming out, or there was a show we went to, and it also allows you to ask questions on the left-hand side. So we call it a blog, and it's monitored, and we do respond based on what people are writing in. Let's see, somebody wrote in, are telematics required on Tier 4? The answer is no. Not everybody is doing that. In the yellow space, in the earth-moving space, we are finding a lot of people either putting it in as standard or as an option. But at John Deere, we've decided to put it on there just for that benefit of being able to support you remotely. And it also allows you, with our system, to update if there's a software update or a field change to do that remotely via the two-way link. Fortunately, we haven't had to make a lot of, I don't know if we've done any remotely. The Tier 4 has done quite well, but that capability is there with JD Link and the telematics to do that, to have the two-way communication. Not just look at data, but also to send updates. Good question. So a lot of people ask what's coming after Tier 4. There is a possibility of a Tier 5 or fuel economy rules. Right now, all of our off-road equipment, there is no fuel economy rules. But the thing we look at very closely is what's happening in the on-road. And in the on-road, you can see that between 2014 and 2018, there will be a lot of changes to the on-road trucks for controlling fuel consumption. And this was in 2010, so almost 2 years ago this came out. And if you look at the trucks, the tractor trailers going down the road, you will see a lot of aerodynamics put onto the machine, onto the tractor and the trailer. You'll see it under the trailer. There's some fenders around the bottom to direct the airflow, and also around the top of the cab to direct the airflow. Unfortunately, in the off-road business, we don't have the benefit of aerodynamics because on a lot of our equipment, they're sitting stationary. You talk about generators or pumps. So one of the things that we're looking at is how do we use hybrid electric technology. And just as an example here, we see this as the path for controlling fuel consumption if there is a regulation. But also with the high price of fuel, a lot of customers are directing us in this path. So this is just a schematic, and our first loader is coming out in the next few months here, a 644 size loader, where the engine acts as a generator on board the loader and creates electricity. And then it goes through power electronics, and power electronics has a lot of switching, AC to DC and then back to AC. And in this case, the motor is controlling the drivetrain. We do have another machine coming out where there'll be one motor per wheel. But the whole point is that when an engine acts in a steady state mode like this, where it's creating electricity, it's the most efficient way, and it also allows you to downsize. So it allows you to take some cost out, but most importantly, it helps you to control the fuel economy and reduce fuel consumption. So we see this as being used a lot in the mobile equipment. But this is very similar to what occurs. It is what is happening in a generator, but we can see this technology spreading further in the off-road market. So those were the questions. That was the material I had, and I was supposed to leave some time for questions. You asked a lot of questions along the way, but okay, here's another one. What about LNG and CNG? There's a lot of interest now in the market for the LNG and CNG. Because the fuel in some cases is half price compared to diesel. At John Deere, we did have CNG engines at one time, and a lot of customers are asking for this again. We haven't brought anything to market yet with LNG and CNG. For a diesel engine, the quickest way is CNG, because you can modify the engine to work on CNG. Right now, our focus has been on the Tier 4 and making that perfect. We've been as close as we expected with perfecting it. And then possibly after that point, you could see some focus again about LNG and CNG. Let's see, there's another one here. Are Tier 4 emission controls required on new equipment only, or will old models have to be modified to new emission regulations by 2014? The answer is basically no. There is no regulation requiring that. I told you about the California rule. The California rule for off-road equipment was delayed by 4 years. And that I think the time when it becomes active again is in 2014. So there will be some more push again in California. I did mention a few places where you can't operate equipment. Now, would you call that a mandate on whether you need to modify old equipment? Not really. If you're a large contractor, you can move equipment around. But we've always mentioned to our customers to think about these rules, learn the regulations, learn what the regulators are thinking. And if you have any questions, check the website. Go into the dealer. We spend a lot of time with our dealers talking about this and training them. And a lot of our dealers are very knowledgeable about the regulations. So you do need to, and the same person asked, is it state by state or federal? Usually it's a county by county, in some cases a city, and in some cases state. California does have air districts. They have port rules in Port of Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach. So yes, it does depend on where you are. So the next question here: should checking these emission controls be included in annual inspection for best practices? Good point. I think that every big fleet should be making this part of their way of acting. I know in our construction fleets, most people are doing that because they have on-highway equipment, but a lot of people had to register their equipment in California. So yes, I would consider that to be a best practice, that contractors register their fleet and make a listing. And we've asked for a lot of our customers to be doing that. Next one here, you talked about hybrid electric. Is there any plans to replace hydrostatic drive with electric on equipment such as cranes? That's exactly the way we think people should be thinking. And a lot of people, when they see this hybrid electric technology on our loaders, they then ask, can we apply it to waste handlers or other equipment? And those are the kinds of discussions that our OEM channel are going through now. So yes, that's exactly what can be done. Just like we've done that on the loader, we replaced a power shift torque converter with a hybrid electric as an option. You could do the same thing on lift equipment. Good thinking. What can you say? What can you add about simpler engines less than 25 horsepower, still meaning Tier 4? The good news below 25 horsepower is most of them are final Tier 4 already. I know on our smallest excavator, it's a compact excavator 17D, and will become a 17G. Those are already final Tier 4. You won't see a particulate filter on there, and they already have gone as far as expected on the Tier 4. So the regulations just affecting above 25 horsepower, and you will see a lot of equipment in this lift and access business will be in that range. But above 25 horsepower, then you start to see the more severe regulations. Another question: do you anticipate engine shutdown controls or engine idle timers for earth moving or access equipment? That's a good question. Most of our machines have the auto idle shutdown already. A lot of those machines I showed you, the loader, the K dozer, the motor grader, excavator, they already have auto idle shutdown. And a lot of the equipment that has a John Deere engine, the software is available. So you probably will see the auto idle shutdown. And that means that if the machine is idling a certain period, that can be put into that monitor. It'll reduce the idle speed, and then it will also shut it off at certain intervals as you program them in. Somebody asked about the DEF equipment, DEF fluid. That's a diesel exhaust fluid. It is the same as that used in the on-highway. That's exactly the same thing. So they're all compatible, just like the CJ4 is the same in on and off highway. The DEF fluid, it will be the same as well. Good question. What are you doing for Latin America, where ULSD may not be available, but you're selling equipment? Good question. If you take a plant tour, a lot of customers came in this week to go down our Davenport factory here in Iowa, and you can see Tier 2, Tier 3, and Tier 4 equipment going down the same line. So that loader I showed, that Tier 3 version is still in production, and the Tier 2 as well for overseas sales. In Latin America, they don't have a Tier 4. In Mexico and down south, they don't have the interim Tier 4. Tier 4 is really focused on U.S., Canada, and Europe, EU 27. The other countries don't have that, so we're still shipping the Tier 2 and 3 to those markets. And just about every piece of our equipment, we have the 3 different engine tiers available. And I think you'll find that as well in the lift and access, that a lot of the older equipment still is being produced and available. And it really has to do with the emission credits in the U.S., but overseas they're still offering the older version. Somebody asked, what's the difference between SCR and DEF? There is no difference. SCR refers to the hardware, and the DEF refers to the fluid. So the DEF fluid is used by the SCR to reduce NOx. The SCR is reducing NOx, and the DPF I mentioned will be used to reduce particulate matter. Somebody asked about the Tier 2 and Tier 3. When will they be discontinued? For overseas sales, they will never be discontinued until those countries have some regulation in place. If you go to the different countries, you will see that there's a lot of plants that are producing equipment in those countries. They are producing Tier 2 and 3. And right now we're building a lot of equipment for export in our Iowa plants. They will, and also down in Kernersville, they will continue to build Tier 2 and 3 for those markets until those countries adopt Tier 4. We don't see a lot of countries adopting Tier 4 in the short term, at least the next 5 or 10 years. A lot of those other countries are still just trying to implement Tier 2 and Tier 3. Wow, a lot of good questions here. I hope Katie's not the only one coming up with these questions.
It is not me. I've maybe posted a couple, but definitely coming from the audience. Lots of good
questions. All right, great questions. Here's another one. How has California managed to keep unregulated emissions from Mexico coming into California? Giant fans. Yeah, I always joke around that there's a big wall between the U.S. and Mexico, and the good emissions are only going one way, and the bad emissions are not going the other. But that's part of the world we live in, that regulations are often set in different markets, and some people have a bigger burden than others. And without getting into the upcoming election and the politics behind it all, yes, that's a good question. But I don't think there are giant fans. I've taken a look along the border. I haven't seen them yet, although I do joke around about them quite often. Any other OEMs in the sector using any process other than SCR? In the on-highway, there was one manufacturer that was thinking not to use SCR, and they've recently switched back and announced they will be using SCR. So SCR is a very efficient way to reduce NOx, and it is kind of a holy grail that if we can avoid it, it would be great. I haven't seen many people saying they're avoiding SCR. There are some manufacturers saying they will be avoiding the DPF. So one way or the other, if you can reduce one or the other, then your cost will go down. It looks like Katie's taking back control here.
I'm taking over
whenever
control.
She wants to cut me off, that'll be great.
No, I'm just posting some websites. The rebroadcast of this presentation will be located on these 2 websites. My contact information is at the bottom in case you have any follow-up questions afterward. Not meaning to cut you off, just wanted to post that up there in case somebody wanted to write it down.
All right, should I keep on answering questions?
Keep answering questions, unless we'll wind them down in just a minute or 2.
All right, there's one here about JD Telematics, tattletale features. So a rental company can tell if a user has abused the engine. Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of information coming back, and a lot of our rental companies are very interested in telematics. So good question, and that's a super way to monitor what's happening with the machine and what customers are doing. Any comments about CARB regulation versus EPA? CARB regulation has mainly been an in-use rule, back to that non-attainment issue. And the EPA is really focused on new equipment. So it's 2 different types of regulation, and you really need to look at what's happening in places like Chicago or Illinois or New York as well. There are a lot of local rules versus the federal. Do I have to make any changes to Tier 4 if a machine is used in Mexico? If it's going to a higher sulfur market, you should take the DPF off the machine. That's a good point. I think I made it through the questions.
You
Katie,
made it
do you
through
want to
all
wrap up?
We had several questions this time. I think this is probably the most we've had. Thank you all again for attending. Thank you, Joe. Lots of great comments and questions here. Again, if you have anything after the presentation and you want to ask it, please feel free to email me or Joe, and we'd be happy to find the answer for you. Again, rebroadcast presentations, I'll try to have those available end of day today, if not by Monday morning. Yes, we will make these slides available to you. If you want to type in your email address, I'm happy to send that afterward. And if there are no further questions, please have a great weekend, and we will see you soon. Our next presentation, I believe, is on equipment theft. It'll happen in October. Don't forget the live Tier 4 panel will take place in Orlando, Florida. That's free to attend. Lots of other events going on that week. LiftsShowcase.com has all the information on that. So please let me know if you have anything else. If not, have a great weekend, and we will see you next month. Thanks, Joe.
All right, thank you.